Today we are joined by five of high experts in the PPP field. We are joined by Mr. Mos'ab Al-Burih, the PPP Executive Director for Tatweer Building Company. Mr. Mos'ab has extensive experience in the infrastructure projects, and he started with the water distribution services in KSA in Saudi, and soon found that he has natural talent for managing the complex project. So he moved to transformation projects, and then he moved after that, Mr. Mos'ab, to become the leading PPP procurer transactions and execution at Tatweer Building Company, which were the Pathfinder schemes in the social infrastructure sector, and he's totally looking over projects with a total of over 9 billion Saudi Riyal in capex and opex expenditure. We also have Mr. Marc Katchouni from Abu Dhabi Investment Office. Mr. Katchouni is the transaction lead and specialist in ADIO, and he has successfully led the Zayed City Schools projects from the original concept all the way to the closing. And he's currently leading the latest PPP projects, the Khalifa University Student Accommodation PPP project. We also have Dr. Muhammed Anis. Dr. Muhammed is the General Manager for Wave 1 project company. He is the SPV General Manager for the Vision International Investment, and he is the Board Director for Wave 2 project company. Mr. Anis is managing the first infrastructure development project, PPP, inside the Kingdom of Saudi. And the program involves the design, build, commission, and finance, and ensure the transfer of 60 schools and associated facilities in the cities of Jeddah and Mecca. We're also joined by Mr. Nicolass de Koning. Mr. Nicolass is the head of PPP bids and assets management at BESIX in the Middle East. He started with highway and waterworks projects in Belgium and Netherlands, and then he relocated to Dubai in the UAE in 2017, where he transitioned to the waste management and social infrastructure PPP project. And Mr. Nicolass has actually led a couple of very successful PPP projects in the region. And last but not least, we have Mr. Churiwala, and he's the Chief Development Officer for Lamar Holding in Development, and he's responsible for leading the origination and the execution of the PPP projects. And he brings a proven track record in the infrastructure investment, having executed more than 25 billion of infrastructure investments. Prior to joining Lamar Holding, Mr. Ani led Hassainen Investments Company, and he also worked at Mubadala Infrastructure Partners and City Group in the Corporate Finance Division in London. Thank you very much and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We will start by, as we spoke, the PPP is actually raising quality. The PPP is actually aims to bring together the best between the best and the public and the private sector. Now, the main reason for that we have PPP in social sector is to raise the quality standards and the levels associated with the social sector. So my first question will be for the private sector and to Dr. Anis. Do you think that private companies, when it comes to PPP, are they prioritizing profit, shareholders, more than providing the highest and better service?
Well, Ismail, the answer for this question is definitely, from the first point, everyone is saying yes, but let us see it from the other concept. If you're not providing the quality, the best quality, the level of standards, if you're not doing this, you're not gonna gain any profit. So from different aspects, you have to be sure that if you're looking for maximizing your profit, you have to maintain the maximum level of standards while providing the service. So it's limited. I have to say they are linked very much to each other's. The professionalism on this project or my project in order to gain much more and relying on the profit and maintain the objectives of the shareholder, of course, is through providing the best service. And in order to provide the best service, you have to work from the beginning, from the early days. Because as everyone knows, what is the main risks for any PPP? If you are going to have the technicality of the project is very much important. You have to look at it. The ability to provide the quality standards. So it's very important for you. And building a relation, of course, with securing the confidence at the end users. So in my opinion, and I don't want to gain more about it, the answer would be yes. And you cannot say that any private sector is always looking for the profitability, the shareholders, of course, but in order to achieve this, you have to maintain and keep maintaining and sustainability of, yesterday we have all heard about the sustainability of the project over 20 years. And you have to, if you worked hard at the early days, which we have done in the last 4 years, you will be very happy. And you, the shareholders will be very happy and provided the best example as you're seeing and taking and returning back the profit to the company or the shareholders. And I provided, of course, Mos'ab because they are the one who is representing and they are paying. We are providing the best service. So that's how we are gaining from it.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the same question to Nico. Do you think that the private sector does prioritize the profit shares rather than the better service?
Well, BESIX, we are an industrial equity provider, so we are active on all three entities consisting a PPP, EPC, O&M, and an investor. And the good thing with the PPP is that the quality required is always very detailed and very well described. So we also know that if we meet those requirements, first of all, we get paid. Second of all, we deliver a good product in all three entities, mostly the EPC and O&M, because that's where the real delivery is. But that doesn't mean that we sort of go the extra mile. I know, for example, on our Hassainen sewage treatment project, our first flagship PPP, which is actually more a concession, but still, where we organize a lot of activities for the local community. I mean, we do go the extra mile because we also know that a PPP, I think we talked about it, Anis, and Mos'ab is a 20 to 30 years marriage. So I would say after the storming of the contract negotiations, it's probably time for some forming or norming and entertain and nourish the relationship that you have on the project, because we have quite some PPP projects where we are a bit further down the road, and it takes time to entertain and to maintain the relationship, and it's really worth the effort, because I think it's tempting to sort of, once operations is financial close, big milestone, completion, big milestone, and I think it's tempting to maybe let go of things and have your quarterly board meeting and follow things from a distance. But our experience is that also in these phases you will go through some relationship issues, so you need to keep on actively working on it. And more and more also in PPP or in agreements, we see all kind of some sort of committees formed around the formal relationship that you have in a contract to cater for these relationships, because especially in social infrastructure, I think would say even more than other assets, there is a client basically on your doorstep. You are that's probably something in social infrastructure that's quite typical. You're basically on a daily basis. Your client is in your physical, in your neighborhood. He's in your asset and using it. So even more for social infrastructure, we always foresee additional committees, additional activities to ensure that you really give the experience that that you promised.
Thank you very much for that. I would like to ask Mr. Ani, do you share the same opinion with them?
Yeah, definitely. So, PPP investors have to be long-term investors. Social infrastructure projects, like the other panelists said, have 20, 25-year period. So it's really a marathon. And developers and investors have to take a pragmatic long-term view. And that requires them to take a balanced approach between maximizing shareholder value and maximizing stakeholder value. And the way most sort of long-term, well-established PPP players try to maximize value is by having more efficient approach, better planning, better execution. I think it's a myth that private sector players always try to maximize profits. I think they try to maximize all stakeholder value. So I'll give an example from our perspective. We try to maximize stakeholder value for everyone by finishing a project 6 months ahead of schedule. It helps us get early completion bonus, it makes the client happy, everybody wins. So I think from an approach perspective, private sector players take that approach rather than trying to maximize profit. It's never a zero-sum game. And that's the approach I think most players are taking.
Thank you very much. From the answer, we can see that you created some sort of a balance between that we are trying to keep the profit shares high and at the same time do not let down our clients because we cannot afford to, obviously. But if I ask for the government part, which is represented today by both Mr. Mos'ab and Mr. Marc, I'll start with Mr. Mos'ab. How do you look at that part of they are looking higher at maintaining a high profit share? Would that look at from a government point of view? How do you look at that from a value for money point of view?
Of course, the government, has to provide or give the opportunity for the private sector to make money. And if the government doesn't allow that, the private sector will not come, basically. So, but the value for money perspective is totally different concept. It's a tool that helps the government officials and decision makers to move from the traditional procurement to the PPP procurement. It's one way of how to look at things when project come to the desks or to the decision maker. Is they look at it from value for money that will help them take a decision in favor of going to the PPP. However, as we go forward with the PPP, more PPP are implementing, and we are in the direction of implementing more PPP. Value for money is not the only thing. I think there are many more other factors that can play in the government side, and also to provide value for all stakeholders involved. One of them is better control and management for the government, less cost to the government. I think there are many things we are seeing and discovering every day as we go with the PPP, especially now in TBC. We are in the stage of delivering the services. Our partner from the private sector are already now delivering the services. In our school, there are already today students in those schools. So the assets are operating. We are seeing other benefits from the government side. We are seeing other benefits than only strictly the value for money.
Thank you very much. Continuing from what Mr. Mos'ab said, Mr. Marc, how do you actually create that balance between having a low cost for the government and allowing the private sector to achieve their profit margins and have that value for money?
Yeah, good question, Ismail. So in terms of how the private sector makes money, ultimately we run a competitive process. So that's one way to drive better value for government. Second of all, once a contract is signed, there is obviously a payment mechanism in place. So in the event that the shareholder or the project code does not deliver on their services, then ultimately there is a regime in place to protect government. So from a shareholder return, for us, it's a competitive process. We don't want to get involved in how much company A makes or company B makes. It's outside our remit as long as we provide value to government. From a VFM perspective or value for money perspective, before we get a project or once we get a project at ADIO, we start by looking at the need. Is there an actual need for this project, be it strategic, technical, or financial? Once this need is established, we look at the commercial and economic case of each individual project. So subsequent to that, we then look at value for money. So value for money is just one of the tools that we take into consideration. We run a pretty standard value for money analysis where you compare your shadow bid model to your public sector comparator, and then you also risk adjust accordingly. And then obviously you run some sensitivities in there just to take into account, I guess, economic and financing, indicators or change in, like for example, changes in inflation, changes in financing cost, etc. So from an ADIO perspective, VFM is one tool, but another big tool that we look at is the economic and commercial case of the project. So just to give you an example, if for some odd reason a project does not demonstrate value for money, so it's then we still have we can still go forward with the project so long as that there is an economic case.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This actually, I will have to remain with the public sector because this takes us to the question that a lot of people ask, which is actually PPP more expensive than going for another solution? Because a lot of times the criticism is raised that even if we borrow money as a government, it will probably be cheaper. Mr. Mos'ab, what would you think about that?
On the is it cheaper or not? I don't think it's practical for the government to go and borrow money. It's not only about borrowing also, it's about also how to operate the assets after the assets is being delivered. A small whole spectrum of construction, service delivery, and also financing, which I don't think it's practical for the government to take the risk. It's a risk private sector is much more capable and able to take and manage better than the government in many ways. Is it cheaper on maybe on the theory? Yes, but practically speaking, I don't think it's it makes sense for the government to take the risk.
Thank you. And Marc, from ADIO's point of view, which is still a government entity, do you look at it in the same way, like what Mr. Mos'ab explained?
So we get this question a lot. Is PPP more expensive than traditional? So if you look at it from a nominal cost input, it appears as yes. But something that you just need to remember is that traditionally procured projects are typically not on time. There's typically cost overruns anywhere from the range of 15 to 20% on capex. And also the asset could be delivered in poor quality compared to PPPs. And something else that people tend to ignore whenever we get that question is the economic residual life of the project, which is enshrined in a PPP contract. So say you have a project that's procured traditionally, a project that's procured via the PPP route. At the end of the 20-some years, if you compare the PPP to the traditional, the residual life is much longer for PPP projects because that's in the contract, and Project Co has an obligation to deliver X amount of year post handback. And so that's just my view on that specific topic.
Thank you very much. That can take us to a next phase or topic for PPP, the relation between the public and the private sectors. And we are lucky enough today to have people from the public and the private that work together on the same project. So let me start by the government, by Mr. Mos'ab. How would you evaluate the relationship between and how do you manage the relationship with the private sector on a PPP project?
As Nicolass just mentioned earlier, that it's a very long-term marriage. Even marriages doesn't last that long, I think. But joke aside, with our partners, with our colleagues from Wave 1 Project Company and Vision Invest, it was really a journey, a normal journey that anybody will take. We start with the Tuckman model, which is forming, storming, norming, then performing, and that's, I think, we have reached to the performing. I hope so. Maybe Anis can get to that, but I think we are in the performing stage. However, there was a very big storming stage, especially when we started this project. It was just during COVID, back in 2020, and everybody knows about what happened during COVID, the challenges we faced. As a result, we went through the storming very quickly, I think, in the relationship. But after that, things get much more smoother, and the performance from both sides, on the government and and our colleague in Wave One Project Company, become more efficient and more practical approach we're taking. Maybe Anis is.
I was actually going to go to Dr. Anis, since you both have been in what you call a PPP marriage in one of your projects. How do you think the relationship evolved between the private and public sector in that specific project?
Well, everyone knows what's happening in marriage. So there is good times and there is hard times. And I believe the first year of any marriage is very difficult and it's very hard, especially if I'm going to say, and it's the truth, that we have the first social infrastructure project in PPP. So everyone from all parties, stakeholders, shareholders, are looking for this as they are a little bit worried. I don't have to say scared, a little bit worried. Everyone wants the success of this marriage, and that's typically the potential for having this. So managing the relation on this marriage is relying on transparency. I'm always saying, if in any kind of relationship, if you have worked with honesty and transparency, no matter where you're coming from, no matter which party you are representing, but the level of trust will be built based on your transparency. So, and I have to make the word 3 times: transparency, transparency, transparency of information, transparency of legal aspects, transparency of documentations. So there we have to work together and build this trust. And after this, and I have to say, after 4 years of this marriage between us, you can see that we are the last person who joined us. We got late because we were outside. We were always talking and talking and talking for the benefit of the project, of course, for the lesson learned, and we were coming to this. But I have to say that we are always open as a private sector with the public sector, and we always, sometimes the transparency might not be accepted by the others, because you're very transparent to say, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do this. This is where we have a hard time. But as you said, we know that's a marriage, long-term one, and we have to make it successful.
That's very interesting, thank you. And talking about transparency, I would like to ask Mr. Ani, how would you manage cases of conflict of interest when it comes between public and private sector, especially that you have to be transparent, you have to maintain the relationship. So how do you manage if there is a conflict of interest?
I think probably conflict of interest is not the right word. I don't think there is conflict of interest. I think it's a different perspective, and there are going to be debates and disputes in terms of how they view things and approach things. And the best way to deal with this is before it happens. So it's very important from the client and off-taker's perspective to have very clear and transparent understanding, as Dr. Ali said, in terms of the service requirements, of the quality, of the KPIs, but also any dispute resolution mechanism. How would any discussions or disputes be resolved? They have to be time-bound in nature. There has to be a well-set forum for them to be resolved. And I think 99% of the time, those disputes and discussions do get resolved. But 20 years is a long period of time. So yes, topics and discussions will come up. Most of the time, topic and discussions are, you're doing a great job, we need you to expand.
Yes.
And like I said, those can always be resolved through discussions. I think there is, over a period of time, there's a lot of appreciation from the government sector that the PPP developers do take a lot of risks. They do take a lot of uncertainty on their shoulders, which risks that the government does not want to take. And that has to be respected over a period of time. And that's why having the right forum is most important to resolve.
That is fair enough. Nico, do you agree with Annie that there is conflict of interest is not the right terminology to use?
Well, there is, of course, by nature a conflict of interest, but with the improving documentation and agreements here in the region, I think that is catered for. Of course, maybe as an eye-opener, there's often some conflict of interest between parties that are consisting, that are making a consortium. Some people are in EPC and in O&M and SPV. Can tell you, to give you maybe an insight in the kitchen from the private side, that takes also quite some discussions. So I don't. Look, where I think, I've been in a few deals, some very well prepared, some that we really had to start out of scratch. When did it really get traction? Is that when a tendering authority showed really their commitment and that they're serious, and that gains trust, and trust makes people in general more transparent. And the authority gains that trust by in 9 out of 10 times saying, okay, I have now this team of specialists and that are going to lead this bit. That gives the confidence, I can tell you, for the private sector to say, hey, they are investing in themselves, in advisors, in having people dedicated to bring this project to the market. And I think that is a very concrete example how you can gain trust from us to you, and of course up to us to give it back.
Of course, and this the PPP on its own in this region is still quite new, so there must be a lot of lesson learned. And I'm conscious that we're running out of time, but I would like to squeeze one last question related to the lesson learned specifically on the procurement process. So I'd like to ask you, Marc, in ADIO or in the projects that you've worked with, how do you utilize the lesson learned to make the procurement process better?
So I think
and more attractive.
From an ADIO perspective, I think we've run a pretty successful procurement process to date. There's obviously some lessons learned around stakeholder management and around alignment, our program policy with Abu Dhabi government policy. But if you look at where ADIO is and where we were a couple of years ago, so phase 1 of ADIO was really setting up the regulatory and governance framework and obviously building institutional capacity. Phase 2, which we're currently in, is rolling out plain vanilla availability-based deal projects, again, that are in asset classes that are familiar to the private sector. But where we're looking to go forward is that phase 3 aspect, which is that monetization of certain assets. And again, this is where we're going to look to push the envelope and push some of that market risk to the private sector. And within that, we're currently looking at opportunities and sectors that we think would be of interest to markets. So overall, I think we ran a good program to date, and we're looking to push the envelope in the future.
Thank you very much. Before we go, Mr. Mos'ab, would you like to add anything to that part?
Yeah, I think I agree with my colleague, Mr. Marc here. The lesson learned is being captured throughout all the process. For example, in KSA, TBC was the first PPP that were launched and financially closed before any other PPP, any other social infrastructure PPP. I think there was a tremendous amount of lesson learned for the government entities. For example, the lesson learned from what TBC has done in the first PPP, and they reflect that in their future, in their transactions and procurement with the other sectors. mentioning just one of the examples was the Ansar Hospital, and many other coming. But the lesson learned is not only on the procurement side. There is also lesson learned on the service delivery side, when the assets started being delivered and operated by the private sector and the government start using those assets, there is tremendous amount of lesson learned that has to be reflected on the procurement process and the documentation in general, and to improve it. And inshallah we will see, and as we go, inshallah we have a very large transaction coming in very shortly, and inshallah hopefully we'll see those lessons from the service delivery are being reflected on our transaction and on our also documentation.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for your time today. Unfortunately, we come to the end of the session today, but thank you.